There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is I'm back with another video offering you some analysis and critique of Bernie Sanders' book, Our Revolution. The bad news is I gave Bernie Sanders a little bit too much credit in my last video.
Now today, I'm going to be talking about the incredibly important issue of income and wealth inequality. For the last 40 years, the American middle class has been disappearing, and more Americans are living in poverty than at almost any point in our nation's history. Since 2005, the typical middle-class family has seen its wealth go down by more than 36%.
I commented that in general, Bernie Sanders claims that the wages of the working poor, the wages of the middle class in America, that they have stagnated in recent decades. I said that Bernie Sanders seems to avoid saying that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, most likely because he is aware that this is statistically untrue. In the United States of America, I showed a whole bunch of charts to demonstrate this fact. Inequality is increasing, but inequality has been increasing because the rich are getting richer much, much more rapidly, exponentially more rapidly than the poor are getting richer. However, still doesn't mean the poor are getting poorer. That is a lie. But here I find on page 191 of this book, quote, in the real world, the rich are getting richer and most everyone else is getting poorer. So there's a claim that both the poor and the middle class are getting poorer. Okay? I've already shown you guys charts to the effect that this is false. Many people just didn't want to believe what the charts showed. I got a lot of really idiotic fan mail or hate mail in response to that. I love that what some people wrote in saying, but those charts don't account for inflation. You're looking at a chart from like 1979 to 2010 or 2015 or something. Ooh, you think those charts don't account for inflation? And what one of the charts, it even says right on the headline, right at the top, it says real wages and cumulative growth of real wages and percentage of gross national income. Like, if you don't know the significance of real wages in relation to inflation, or measures like percentage of GDP, percentage of gross national income in relation to inflation, I can't help you people. I mean, you're looking at the facts, and you're refusing to see what's there in front of your face because you want to keep believing the myth that the poor are getting poorer even when the facts show you the opposite. So this is the situation we're in the mainstream left today. And here is Bernie Sanders saying loud and clear, two lies. The first lie is the rich are getting richer and everyone else is getting poorer. This is the first lie. And then the second lie, I don't think I need to read it out. You can probably tell within that quotation. He claims that Congress, that the federal government of the United States is doing nothing to deal with this. This reads, you could do an impersonation of Bernie Sanders. It sounds like it was transcribed from his speech. The writing style is very much like a speech now. And what are the members of Congress doing about these issues? I will tell you what they are doing. They are outspending a ridiculous amount of time raising money for the next campaigns. And then, once elected, they're representing the interests of the people who funded those campaigns. So he is claiming that the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the federal government is doing nothing to help the poor. Okay, so both of these lies we can fact check through a quick Google search. Let's do it, people. Here's a quote from Michael R. Strain. I am guessing at the time this photograph was taken, Michael Strain was not vegan. Just a guess, Michael. By all means, send me an email and let me know if I'm wrong. I'm guessing you are not on a vegan diet. That would be my guess. Quote, let's go with the average hourly earnings of production and non-supervisory employees produced by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. About 4 in 5 people in the labor force are included in this group. They can be thought of roughly as workers, not managers. They're often described as typical workers. And many of the statistics use this. It is a kludge that basically excludes people like executives and, yes, managers. it tries to exclude people whose pay is not going to be in such a simple and straightforward way based on the hours of labor. As you know, executives may have all kinds of special privileges and bonuses and stuff. So it's trying to look at so-called normal workers. Using the PCE to adjust for inflation. These statistics are adjusted for inflation, guys. It's just, sorry if you can't interpret really, really simple economic and social science statistics. Use the PCE to adjust for inflation. The wages of a typical worker have increased by 32% over the past 3 decades. That's a significant increase in purchasing power. If all people hear is that wages have been stagnant for decades as part of a game rigged to benefit the people at the top, they might well believe it. Okay, let's go on to a new chart, just new in the sense that it hasn't appeared in my prior video. Here we are zoomed out. You can see that the source is from the C.B.O, the American Congressional Budget Office. But let's zoom in. What are we looking at, people? What are we looking at? On the left, you see the growth in income before the effect of the federal government's intervention. Okay? So there are several different myths and misconceptions being exploded in this video. One is just the idea that the poor are getting poorer. Okay, if we look at the left-hand side of this chart, look at the green lines, that does not show the poor getting poorer. Let's just say you look from 1995 to 2015. The 2 green lines, right? This does not show the poor getting poorer. That's just a lie, okay? But here's the other thing that's really interesting. If we compare to the purple chart on the right-hand side, wow, what a dramatic difference the federal government makes. And I looked into it. This is exactly what Bernie Sanders was complaining about. He was complaining about Congress. He wasn't complaining about the local mayor or the local state governor. He was complaining about the federal government, okay? This is not calculating the effects of state level or city level interventions. This is just measuring the effect of federal government interventions. And this report from the C.B.O. was criticized for that reason. That it's much more complex to take into account all 50 states and the conditions there. You'd have to have a lot more lines in the chart. But just the effect of the redistribution of income that the federal government brings to the people of the United States of America is dramatic. So the lightest line, the lowest quintile line, instead of going up by only 32, has gone up by 79. Look at that lilac purple line. How much this? Look at the dramatic effect of government intervention and redistribution from the rich to the poor by that good old US of A. So these are powerful myths that the mainstream left has. This isn't like communism or socialism. The mainstream American left is clinging to the myth, the same myths that people like Bernie Sanders and the other people attending the Democrat primaries that they weave and present. They're clinging to the myth that the poor are getting poorer. They're clinging to the myth that the federal government is doing nothing to help or uplift the poor. Now, we just looked at a very real quantitative measure of how dramatic the impact of that is.
Since 2005, the typical middle-class family has seen its wealth go down by more than 36%. For the last 40 years, the American middle class has been disappearing, and more Americans are living in poverty than at almost any point in our nation's history.
And a third myth, I challenge you in my audience to let me know if you've ever heard Bernie Sanders invoke this one. A third myth that's very important for the current generation is the myth that capitalism will inevitably fail, will inevitably implode, will inevitably collapse or tear itself apart. Why? Because allegedly, capitalism requires, quote unquote, infinite resources.
Since profit can only be achieved through growth, a capitalist must always push production farther and farther. However, Production requires the use of goods that are not infinite, like labor and natural resources. Since capitalism cannot administer a limit, it will always eventually crash. In other words, capitalism always ends up destroying the hand that feeds it.
Now, that is the most laughably unempirical, unfalsifiable, dogmatic, and ridiculous claim imaginable. And it falls apart just through a simple process of Socratic dialogue. Like, okay, so what is it that capitalism requires? What factor does capitalism require to be infinite, given that throughout its entire history, none of the factors of production have been infinite, right? Capitalism doesn't need infinite labor, doesn't need infinite water, doesn't need infinite coal. On the contrary, the price mechanism in capitalism is very much tethered to the idea that all of the factors are finite. At least the amount that's available is finite, right? So actually, really from a strictly theoretical perspective, capitalism thrives on finitude and thrives on scarcity. It responds to scarcity with the pricing mechanism. But moreover, why would this claim be made just about capitalism? If this were true, if there were any validity to this claim that human society requires infinity to sustain itself, why would that be true of capitalism but not true of feudalism? Like, are you saying this is true of the United States of America, but it's not true of Saudi Arabia? How does that make sense? It's not true of like feudal Europe, year 1500 or something. How does that make sense? Why would this claim, if it's ultimately about the things of this earth, like water and gasoline, why would it be that capitalism requires these things to be infinite, but not a communist system, a communist command economy like the Soviet Union? Okay.
Meaning a corporation will run out of resources to use, or that pollution will start to be so great that it will start to affect the costs of production. This is the natural outcome from a system that seeks to produce the most amount of goods for the least amount of money possible. Capitalism is a system that needs to perpetually grow, and perpetual growth on a finite planet with finite resources is impossible.
So that is one more lie that, as far as I know, Bernie Sanders, I mean, look, if you go through the guy's whole career, if you go back to 1985, maybe you can find him saying that somewhere. But in his current act, in his current routine, I think this video has addressed two lies that Bernie Sanders does tell and one that he does not.